So next up, we have Dr. Drew Dundas with Earlens.
Just as a usual sort of conference disclosure, I am both an employee and a shareholder of Earlens in Menlo Park, California. Heard about some really cool technology this morning, and I think we can all agree that all acoustic hearing aids really do incorporate amazing technology. They've been developed by some really, really smart people, many of them. Some of them are in this room, many of them I count as friends, and they just really do change people's lives. And we're seeing these new features being introduced every single year. So that's sort of the glass half full perspective of our market that we're in today. If we look at things from the other side of things, glass half empty, the challenge that we face with all acoustic hearing devices, they all work in the same way. They all use the same transducers from two manufacturers in the world, and they're all limited by the same factors as a result. And sadly, as we've seen over the last few years in the changing market that we're in many cases, these devices, to patients at least, are indistinguishable from big box and over-the-counter technologies. So as independent providers, as audiologists, as people working in various practice settings, how can we thrive while that market continues to change? Do we want to compete with Costco on price? Are we offering the best service in town like everybody else? Are we just going to offer free hearing tests? Well, I'd argue that the way that we can really compete in this market is to provide superior outcomes with our patients, and that we can differentiate our practices by adopting unique products and services, and in many cases by leveraging the connections that we have as independent audiologists or audiologists in practices to work more closely with the physicians who are referral sources, peers and colleagues, and allied health providers as truly a differentiator in the medical treatment of hearing loss as opposed to simply selling hearing aids. Now, what is truly effective treatment of hearing loss? Well, as we've seen over the many years and have seen in increasing detail with new products and new research coming out from various groups, including the Lancet, sensory neural hearing loss is really a form of sensory deprivation. And the downstream side effects of this are much more wide-reaching than having trouble understanding when your grandkid's talking from across the room. So effective treatment for individuals with sensory hearing loss is really focused, it always has been, but we often lose track of restoring audibility for speech across the broadest possible frequency range. And that with that restoration of audibility, we can actually observe the reversal of cortical remapping that's occurred due to that sensory deprivation. Secondly, by providing that expanded bandwidth, we can maximize speech intelligibility performance, supporting the social engagement that's so important for maintaining cognitive function long-term, avoiding depression, social withdrawal, and so on, and simultaneously reduce listening effort, simply by providing a broader bandwidth of processed audibility. The nice side effect that comes out of this, we've heard a lot today about sound quality, how important this is to patients. Well, we've all experienced it. When you have a limited bandwidth, taking your AirPods and holding them a couple of inches from your ears, the sound quality is very poor. However, when we're able to provide that broad bandwidth of audibility to the patient, maximizing audibility occurs, and we get really consistent usage for the patient. And lastly, effective treatment of hearing loss is all about incorporating both the audiologic and medical perspectives of assessment, treatment, and ongoing care, as we saw in the study published by Lynn and colleagues earlier this year. So how does Earlens fit into this? Well, Earlens is a tiny custom driver on the tympanic membrane that's used to directly activate and vibrate the umbo of the malleus. And this has some great advantages for the patient because it provides audible amplification, not just processed bandwidth, across the broadest possible bandwidth of frequencies for both speech and music and environmental sounds, providing audibility for people with up to severe high-frequency losses with processed audibility from below 100 hertz all the way up to 10,000 hertz. This works out to being about 2.5 times the audible processed bandwidth of any of the competitive devices that are on the market today, even for people with only a moderate high-frequency hearing loss. The benefits are very striking to patients. We see a dramatic improvement in speech intelligibility and background noise. We get reports of massively superior sound quality because of that extended bandwidth, and superior performance over even well-fit, match-to-target acoustic hearing aids. And we all know how challenging it can be to fit people to validated fitting targets and have them tolerate that listening experience. Now, I made a claim there about audibility. And this audio scan screenshot is taken from a paper that was published by Dr. Gus Mueller a year or so ago. This is, for everyone who's familiar with this, obviously we'll kind of jump through this, but the dotted line at the bottom represents normal hearing threshold, 0 dB HL converted to SPL. The blue line represents a mild sloping to moderate hearing threshold set in dB SPL as well. The green shaded region is average level speech. And the way that we should really be thinking about real ear measurements like this is the simple idea that things that fall above that blue line are sounds that the patient can hear, and things that fall below it are things that they can't. Now, I mentioned that all the transducers and all acoustic devices come from the same two manufacturers, and that limitation is really found in the maximum output curves of these devices. You can see that even for this mild sloping to moderate loss, average level speech amplified fit to target passes below the thresholds of the listener by about 4,000 hertz. So a typical bandwidth of audibility for a patient with a loss like this is, in a well-fit hearing aid, really sort of pushing the limits up to about 5K, which is not a whole lot of the overall available speech signal. Now, why is this? Well, all acoustic devices work in the same way. They all take a acoustic signal, electrify it using a microphone, digitize, process, amplify, provide fantastic algorithmic support to the patient, but they all put out an amplified signal into the ear canal. That signal then vibrates the eardrum, but it also creates feedback pressure. There are the issues with comb filtering that were discussed earlier. These can be real challenges in providing benefit to patients and limiting audibility. Earlens works the same way on the front end. Same sort of microphone, same sort of processing, but rather than produce sound in the ear canal, we actually send out an ultra-low power radio signal from a coil that's in the ear tip. The signal provides both power and audio data to the custom-built transducer that vibrates the umbo of the malleus. And this is able to very efficiently overcome the impedance mismatch between the very springy air and the very stiff eardrum and transmit that energy very efficiently into the middle ear and onwards to the inner ear, providing that extended bandwidth. Now, what's that bandwidth end up looking like? Well, with the acoustic device, for processed actual audibility in an open fitting condition, we're typically looking at 800 to maybe 5,000, 5,500 hertz, as I mentioned earlier. With Earlens, in that same fitting, open, bandwidth processed from below 100 hertz all the way up to 10 kilohertz, even for streaming. And again, I'll emphasize the importance that there's a big difference between processed bandwidth and audible bandwidth for listeners with hearing impairment, because patients can only benefit from signal processing in the frequency regions where that signal is actually audible to them. Now, why does this bandwidth impact sound quality? Well, Brian Moore at Cambridge University and his colleagues published a great paper 20 years ago illustrating this difference. They showed that if you started with the bandwidth of a typical landline phone call and extended bandwidth upwards only, rated sound quality did not really improve for people. In the same vein, if they extended only down to the low frequencies, providing additional bandwidth, this didn't really help things either. But when they extended into both the lows and the highs, the ratings of the overall sound quality improved dramatically. This is borne out in a study that was conducted at the University of Western Ontario on Earlens users, where we manipulated the output of the device to go from a 100 to 5,000 hertz bandwidth, switching that up to a 100 to 10 kilohertz bandwidth, and showed more than a doubling in overall rated sound quality simply by providing the patient with the highs. Now, this often seems to fall in the face of what we'd see in a clinical environment, where people don't want the highs, but it's the combination, the pedestal of the lows supports the clarity of the highs, allowing the patient to achieve normalized specific loudness across each of the critical bands of the cochlea and a great listening experience. Now, that audibility also improves speech understanding in difficult listening situations like competing speech. Again, Dr. Scully's lab demonstrated very nicely that if we had a talker off to one side and multiple talker maskers surrounding the patient, we were able to demonstrate that we'd see about a 2 to 3 dB improvement simply by increasing the bandwidth from 5 kilohertz to 10 kilohertz. It's a big deal for patients, right? It's like going from 50% to 80% correct. When we compared the performance for listeners using conventional devices that were fit to NAL NL2 targets, so sort of the gold standard of audibility with acoustic devices, we could figure out what was the signal noise ratio at which they'd achieve 50% correct. And then calculate the performance that they got, or measure the performance that they got on the same sort of task where they're repeating back sentences, listening in a background of other talkers. Simply by switching them to Earlens and providing them with processed audibility over the frequency range from 100 up to 10,000 hertz, we actually saw a greater than 30% improvement in their overall performance. This is hugely game-changing for patients in a realistic, difficult listening environment to have that more realistic, more fulfilling, and higher performance listening experience with much lower listening effort. So why would you consider incorporating Earlens into your portfolio? As I mentioned earlier, we're in a very changing marketplace right now. We see a lot of blurring of lines across OTC devices, DTC offerings, DTC being direct to consumer, as well as big box offerings where we're only competing on price. Earlens is truly focused on the medical treatment of sensorineural hearing loss. It offers a differentiated value proposition to your patients. They can experience that difference in sound quality using our comparator device. We do have them at our booth. I hope you'll come and visit us and take a listen and compare to the premium air conduction device of your choice. It's truly dramatically different experience for patients. And we're also taking the approach of disambiguating the cost of devices from the overall cost of care. Because I don't know about all of you, but I'm tired of hearing how expensive hearing aids are when the bulk of what patients are paying for is your time, effort, and expertise. Earlens is only available through partnerships between audiology and ENT groups, because of the need for a full ear canal impression of the surface of the eardrum that's conducted by the physician in the office and for the physician placement of the lens. Beyond that point, it becomes a heavily audiology-focused experience, and I think that you will find that your patients will be absolutely delighted. Thank you for your time.